Hi and welcome to a new video, and today's video will be about this box. A box that weighs 7.5 kilogram, which is actually really heavy considering that it's a mainboard. It's a mainboard from AORUS. It's the Z390 AORUS Xtreme Waterforce 5G, and you might think this is just the mainboard that you have seen probably on other channels already. That's the special Z390 board, which comes with a full cover water block, and that's actually true. So that's the very special mainboard from Gigabyte that has this massive and amazing water block that's cooling the VRMs, the CPU, and also the chipset, which is something that's really rare because nowadays monoblocks, they never really cool the chipset, which is not really necessary, but it's just visually and also technically really cool. But this version, the 5G version, comes as a bundle with a 9900K pre-overclocked at 5.1 GHz. And that's something I'm really interested in, because we were selling pre-tested CPUs at Caseking. We're pre-testing 9900Ks every single day at Caseking, and I can tell you that 5.1 GHz is not really that common. Not many CPUs can really do 5.1 GHz stable across all different scenarios. That's why I'm really curious how AORUS pulled this off, how they managed to get this stable, how they managed to find those very golden CPUs, and how they also set them. So we will take a look inside the box, check what's inside, how this thing looks like, also check out the settings, and of course the main or most important part, if this is stable in games and benchmarks. Inside the big AORUS box we basically have two of those boxes, and the first one contains the mainboard. So if we open this one, we can straight see the CPU is already sitting inside the socket, so it's a retail 9900K. I will not remove the CPU from the socket because some mainboards have a function that if we remove the CPU, it will reset the BIOS. I'm not sure what's set in the BIOS, that's why we'll keep it for like that for now. Removing the board, you can see we have the AORUS RGB fan commander in here, so it's an RGB fan controller, of course manual, and underneath here we have the accessories. So if we just remove this box, open this box, we have all type of accessories like temperature sensors here. We have SATA cables, and those SATA cables are already sleeved, which is something I really like. Wi-Fi antenna, so everything that you need is already included, and my personal favorite is this thing. It's the Gigabyte Gcoz Touch. It's a feature I think I already saw with C87 or C97, so something I really loved back in the days when I was using a lot of Gigabyte mainboards for extreme overclocking. So you can see it covers functions like B-clock, downclock, B-clock, upclock. You can change the ratio of your CPU. You can also reset power on your system. You can also read out all the voltages, and this extra PCB is basically connected to the mainboard over this connector. So that's a very cool feature to have in addition, especially for extreme overclocking. However, you would typically do extreme overclocking with the non-Waterforce version, so just the AORUS Xtreme. The second box contains the monoblock, so monoblock on the left, and all the accessories like screws. We have an additional socket bracket, and we have all the thermal pads down here. This thing is the reason why everybody loves this mainboard so much. Basically, it's a very unique monoblock that covers everything. It covers CPU, so that's the intake here, goes directly onto the CPU. Where we have a jet plate down there with a very fine structure, so the cooling will be very good. Then it goes down here through this channel, cools the chipset, which is something that's also very unique these days, because these days nobody is really cooling the chipset with a monoblock. That's very uncommon nowadays. Then it goes back, cools VRM, and that's the outlet. And what you can see around the outlet, also intake, and also around all the O-ring inside the monoblock, we have this special connection layer that goes to the electrical connection here, and it can basically detect if there is a water leak somewhere. So if you're not really familiar with water cooling, I mean, it's really unlikely that this thing will leak because everything is tested, so it's really unlikely. I'm pretty sure it will not happen. But if you're not really familiar or not really confident about water cooling, if you're afraid that it will leak, this will help you, because this can detect if something leaks. It will protect your hardware, so you can be sure that nothing goes wrong. If we turn it around, all we can see is nickel-plated copper, which is absolutely beautiful. Starting from the chipset cooling down here, so there's a thermal pad that's already prepared. We have a ton of thermal pads on here where we have to remove those covers. So thermal pad here for M.2 SSDs. We have this one for the MOSFET. This is for the network chip. This goes to the inductor, and underneath this cover we have thermal paste already pre-applied for the mounting on your CPU. Everything is up and running, so we have the mainboard bundle on here in combination with 2080 Ti. We have 16 GB Trident Z RGB memory, 3200, nothing really special. We have a 360 custom water cooling loop with a DDC, which is running at about 40% speed, so it's not a maximum pump speed, just to get rid of the noise, because I don't really like the DDC when it's running at 100%. And you really have to admit this board is absolutely beautiful. Especially if we compare it with the typical monoblocks which are out there. This one, which is completely embedded inside the mainboard design, it looks just, yeah, it looks just really, really nice, I have to admit that. And the system is just running right now. I did manual overclocking because I did just all the benchmarking today. So I started with the Gigabyte profile at 5.1. So it's very simple. You go inside the BIOS, you just load this Gigabyte 5.1 profile and everything is running. So that's perfectly fine. But I wanted to compare what happens if I do manual overclocking at 5.1, like if I'm better than the Gigabyte profile or not, or if I can tweak the performance somehow. For now, this is still running the manual overclock right now at 5.1 GHz, 1.36 volt. And I was playing around with the OC Touch from Gigabyte. This is just so nice. So as you can see, it's just running at 5.1. If I press ratio -1, it's clocking down to 5. Once again, it's clocking down to 4.9. Hitting plus, it's going up back to 5, back to 5.1. So this feature, it's just so nice because it's so simple. It doesn't have any unnecessary features, like you don't need a display on here that's showing you whatever stuff, and navigation is simple because you just have the minus and plus buttons, so that's perfect. Let's quickly take a look at hardware info because I still kept that open during all the benchmarks I was performing. So I was running Prime 95 for 1 hour, performing multiple Cinebench R15 runs, performing Adobe Premiere rendering runs, and you can see this is the VRM temperature, and currently we're having 32 degrees Celsius, but the maximum between all those runs was 45 degrees Celsius. So it's extremely cold. That's like absolutely nothing. That's the coldest I've seen in a very long time, and that's only because of this monoblock. It's not possible getting those kind of temperatures with air cooling. That's absolutely impossible. That's only possible if you have water cooling on the VRMs. So that's really, really nice. I just like that. Also, when it comes to the CPU, I was a little bit worried when I heard about this bundle because, you know, when we were pre-testing all the 9900Ks at Caseking, we're pre-testing hundreds of CPUs in a month. And then you know kind of what the CPUs are capable of and what they're not capable of. And 5.1 is actually not really easy to find. Not many CPUs are capable of handling 5.1 in all kind of situations, especially at a certain or at a good voltage. I was really worried that Gigabyte would maybe apply like, I don't know, 1.45, 1.5 volt, and the voltage would be so high, which then results in a very high power consumption, very high temperature. But that's not the case. I manually tested the CPU and it can do 5.1 in every situation at 1.36 volt, which is really decent. I mean, that's top, I would say top 3% CPU. That's really hard to find. If you just randomly buy a CPU like this, it's really difficult to find 5.1, 1.36 volts. So I have to give them that the CPU is really, really solid. We can also check if we're just running Cinebench R15. Actually, don't be confused by that. The voltage readout here is not correct. If I'm measuring this, it's 1.36. That's why it's nice to have the OC Touch, because you know you can never trust software. And if you're just checking the VRM temperature right now, you can see that nothing really happens. We still have like 35 degrees Celsius. Performance is also in line with 2120 points in R15. As I said before, I was a little bit concerned when it comes to clocks and voltages because I wasn't really sure how Gigabyte would treat the CPU, how they would clock it, because they're doing like a dynamic overclocking, which then kind of requires load as well, because if it's not running high load, it will not go to like 5.1, which kind of makes sense as well, because then they can also do dynamic voltage. So the CPU is not always at 1.36, it's just using as much as it needs. Sometimes it goes down to like 1.29 at 4.8, but goes up to like 1.36, 5.1 gigahertz once it's required. And that's why I was double checking what the Gigabyte OC is versus my manual OC. So for example, in Adobe Premiere, I was rendering a 4K movie of about 20-minute length. And with the Gigabyte profile, I had 14 minutes and 57 seconds. While with manual OC at 5.1, I had 14 minutes and 44 seconds. So I was only a little bit ahead, while the CPU is always clocking at 5.1, like always. Even in Windows idle it will not clock down. Same goes for R15. With the Gigabyte profile I had 2129, while my manual OC was 2140. So there's only a very, very small difference. That's actually tolerance, like 10 points in R15 multi, that's tolerance. R15 single, I had 217 with Gigabyte, 219 manual. Even that, it's like 2 points, can almost be considered tolerance, so there's not really a difference. So it's pretty much safe to say that the Gigabyte profile is as good as my manual overclock. There's not really a difference, except for that the Gigabyte profile will clock down once the clock is not needed, and also will lower the voltage, so that's positive and good for your CPU lifetime. I quickly went to BIOS to basically show you how this works with the Gigabyte profile. It starts like this in the easy mode, and then you hit F2, which I prefer because it's like the advanced mode, you have much more options. And if you go to MIT and advanced frequency settings, there is the 9900K all-core 5.1 GHz OC profile, and you basically just set this to enabled and you're done. There's nothing else you have to do. It's just this single setting and the CPU is set to 5.1 and it really works. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that this setting is not setting an AVX offset, which is, in my opinion, really important. I will ask Gigabyte if they can maybe adjust this in the future BIOS versions and maybe set an AVX offset of 3 by default, because I noticed obviously if you're running a 5.1 GHz profile and you're running AVX 512 with the latest Prime 95, it will crash. There is no way it can do 5.1. It's simply not possible, but that's not Gigabyte's fault. It's just the CPU cannot do 5.1, right? But Gigabyte should adjust this setting, and I'm sure they will listen to me, so that's what I will give them as feedback. That's the only thing you should keep in mind. So if you have this setup and you're getting this exactly with the 5.1 GHz CPU, just keep in mind that after enabling the 5.1 preset, also enable AVX offset at 3, and then you're good to go. To draw a conclusion, obviously the bundle is really, really expensive, which kind of also makes sense because it's a very low quantity bundle. So I think they're not making thousands of this board, also not thousands of the monoblock. And if you're already investing so much money for this socket, if you're getting this board and a monoblock, it also makes sense that you're getting a decent CPU. It doesn't really make much sense to just get a random CPU that can maybe do only 4.8, 4.9. Then the mainboard cannot really deliver as much as it could in theory if you're having a really good CPU. So it really makes sense to get this bundle. 5.1 GHz at 1.36, as I said, it's maybe top 3, top 4%. It's a very solid CPU. Maybe there are even better CPUs out there. I could imagine that if you're lucky, you can maybe get like 1.32, 1.30 volt at 5.1. Considering that it's stable in all scenarios, I'm really, really happy, because that was really my concern. Sometimes, or thinking about the past when we were getting like overclocking profiles from vendors, it sometimes happened that they were either not stable in all situations or at very ridiculous voltages, so maybe 1.45, 1.5 volt. I was really concerned that Gigabyte would apply an enormously high voltage, but it's perfectly fine. 1.36, it's a perfectly fine voltage. No concerns here about the voltage. So if you're a friend of exclusive hardware, if you want to spend a lot of money for this socket, this is something you can invest in. It's absolutely beautiful. It also works perfectly fine, especially with the OC Touch. Just really love this PCB. I wish they would bundle this with more mainboards in future. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. See you soon.